You are on Facebook.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Gary Borgendale. I'm kind of stepping in here tonight and helping with First Tuesday Conservatives as we talk about the aftermath of the 2020 elections. And joining me is Ed Morrissey, from a nationally syndicated host from HotAir, and also a good friend of mine. And so it's welcome to have Ed with us tonight. But what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk about the elections. And obviously the big issues would be the president and what's going on there. But I'm not going to do that right away. I'm just going to step away from the president and just talk about some of the other things that we saw across the country, House races, Senate races, those type of things. So Ed, we're going to get your overview of, let's start with the House of Representatives in the United States. What do you see happening from the House of Representatives across this land this year?
Well, Gary, first off, great talking with you, and thanks for stepping in at the last minute. I mean, we just got to let folks know at Alpha News and First Tuesday Conservatives what a stud Gary Borgendale is, because
Thank you very much.
because we had a little bit of a gap here in terms of who I was going to partner up with tonight, and Gary just really stepped up big time, huge time tonight. And Gary's a great friend of mine anyway, so it's always great talking with Gary. So House of Representatives. Look, I mean, I think Republicans actually had a really good election this year, with the one exception, right? This is the first time in my memory that in a high turnout national election, Republicans won pretty much everything down ticket that was within range. They picked up seats in the House. They appeared so far basically to have held serve in the Senate. They didn't lose any ground in state legislatures. In fact, they picked up a couple. And the expectation going into this was, if there was a high turnout election, Democrats were going to crash through state legislative elections. They were going to expand their majority in the House. And normally when you elect a first-term president, you expect to see a big shift towards that president in the House and in the Senate. Didn't happen this time. That's because the presidential elections really fought on a completely different basis. But all the way down the ticket, voters said they preferred Republicans.
Is there any reason why you saw more of that preferred Republicans versus others then out there? Is there any?
Sure. I think you take a look at the issues, and the Democrats were pushing the defund the police. They were pushing this progressive line. They thought that progressivism was the way to reach voters. And it flopped. I mean, Barack Obama said this, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, in an interview with Peter Hamby on CNN. But, if you go around saying defund the police, you're going to lose votes. People don't want to defund or abolish the police. And of course, this is playing out right in our backyard, Gary. Here in the Twin Cities, we're seeing what happened in Minneapolis with that. People don't like that. And so you get into the suburbs, and people get very, very worried about that. And that's where Democrats lost the House seats that they're losing. It's where they lost the state legislatures they were expected to win. It is where they won the presidency, but that was for other reasons. And I think what the lesson of this, if you take a look at the entire election, the lesson of this is that you had massive turnout. Democrats didn't benefit from it. What the voters wanted was basically Republican policy without that one particular Republican in charge of it. And so what you got here is you get a reset. And I think the other thing it says is that Joe Biden was probably the only Democrat who could have won this election for his party. If they'd nominated anybody else, I don't think that they would have won. And I think that's actually sort of the opposite of what people thought was going to be the case, right? It's like, oh my gosh, Joe Biden's like the most incompetent candidate ever, but he was the safest one.
I know we want to talk to the president, but let's go back in the House. I know in Minnesota, we picked up one House seat. We picked up the 7th congressional out of northwestern Minnesota with Michelle Fischbach. Any other observations you saw from a Minnesota standpoint on the House races?
I guess I was a little disappointed that we couldn't get back, MN02. That's my district.
Yep.
I think it's still a narrow run thing between progressives and conservatives in the second congressional district. I think, though, that this does show that the Democrats' penetration into the first and second ring suburbs is real. That it's going to be difficult for Republicans to organize to recapture those. You're really going to have, I think, an outstanding candidate to do that. You know, John Klein held this district for several cycles because John Klein was just an excellent congressman. And I think if he'd still wanted to keep running, he'd still have the seat.
Correct. Yeah.
But I mean, you can take that exact same argument and explain why Colin Peterson held on for so long in deep red Minnesota 7, right? It's not because people wanted Democrats out there. That was Trump land by 25 points 4 years ago, right?
They like Colin.
They like Colin because why? Because Colin responds to his constituents. Colin is one of those constituents. He is representative of that community. He doesn't get ideological. The whole thing is about, I'm here for the farmers, right? I'm here for the farmers. I'm here for my constituents. And that's, I don't necessarily like the way he votes, but he's a very good congressman. He's been a very good congressman for Minnesota 7. So I'm happy that Michelle Fischbach won that, but that's what it takes. It really takes a candidate of that caliber to carry that in going forward. Now, I think that there's still a good shot in 2022 because first-term presidents tend to do poorly. I think Joe Biden basically got in on a promise of being boring. Boring is a problem in the midterms. So I suspect that Republicans have a lot of ground that they can still make up from the last cycle. But it's going to be tough. Minnesota 3, Minnesota 2, it's going to be tough.
Right. Now, is there any other House races across the nation that surprised you? I think there's still probably half a dozen or so that are still too close to be calling, unless you have a later update on that for me, Ed.
I think they're almost all called now. The only one I think that is still outstanding is New York's 22nd, and that's because New York is just terrible at this. You know, one thing we should be proud of as Minnesotans is we actually have an electoral system that works pretty well. We have optical scan ballots that we fill out by hand. We can count those fast. We can count those accurately. We can go back and do recounts very easily when we need to do it. Our process works pretty well. I'd put our process right up there with Florida. I put our process up there with a couple of the other states that it's just there aren't that many problems. The only issue is, and we're going to probably talk about this in a little bit, is when you get down to a few dozen votes being the gap, then obviously all the little things that normally wouldn't matter are going to start becoming big, and that's what's happening in New York 22. It's what happened in Iowa 2, right? I think it was Iowa 2.
Yes,
it was a 6 vote. The Republican Miller Meeks won it by 6 votes. 6 votes out of 388,000 votes cast, I think, or 390.
Right? Yeah.
300, something like that. 392,000. It was a 6-vote race.
So one vote does make a difference. So always remember that when it takes to go out there.
It does.
Let's jump to the United States Senate. I don't know if there's really any surprises. I think it was probably surprised here in Minnesota that the difference we saw between Jason Lewis and Tina Smith, I thought it would have been much closer than that. Yeah. Ed, any observations on the House or the Senate race here in Minnesota?
No, I always thought that I was looking at the polls and Jason was closing in a little bit. And then he had to have that emergency surgery, took him off the campaign trail. And thank goodness he's from what I hear, he's doing well, recovering, and that's what's important. So Jason, right. If you're watching, our prayers are still with you, and hopefully you're recovering well. I know that had to be a really bitter disappointment, but when you look at the actual gap, I don't think that was what broke him in the election. I think that, again, a high turnout election in a state like Minnesota is really going to favor Democrats. And that's what happened.
300,000 vote different in Ramsey and Hennepin. You can't overcome that outstate.
You can't. And this reminds me of what I was warning people about in 2016, because people in 2016 were saying, hey, look, Donald Trump got within 1.4 percentage points of Hillary Clinton. we're coming back. And it's like, you have to understand that the reason why it was that close is because Hillary Clinton didn't turn out the vote. She
Right.
lost something like 180,000 votes off of what Barack Obama had gotten 4 years earlier. And that was really what the difference was. Trump added about 2,000 votes to Mitt Romney's total. So in a low turnout election, Republicans do better. In a high turnout election in Minnesota, that's going to almost always benefit Democrats. And that's what happened this time around. It was a high turnout election. A lot of people were locked in their houses, not a whole lot else to do. Politics became their passion. And I think that that's true nationwide. And it's the reason why and with the mail-in ballot option, it became a lot easier for those people to access the ballot box, and they took advantage of it.
Right. Across the Senate in the United States, I guess the losses in Arizona and Colorado probably weren't too surprising. We did pick up Alabama, a seat there. So I don't think there's really much of a surprise with other Senate races, Ed.
There were a couple. Not Arizona. Martha McSally, God bless her, she's just not a terribly good candidate. She lost the Senate race to Kirsten Sinema earlier, and then they nominated her for, Doug Ducey appointed her to the other seat. This is McCain's seat. And then it's a special election, so she had to run for it again and lost again. So this is the second straight Senate race that she's lost. She may be a fine senator, but she's not a great campaigner. Arizona is a tough state for Republicans right now. So that doesn't surprise me too much, but I think a better candidate could have carried that state.
Okay.
And maybe not one with, maybe if it hadn't had Trump at the top of the ticket, McSally or another Republican would have done better against Mark Kelly. Colorado, not a surprise. Colorado's been going blue for, a decade now. So
Since all the people from California moved to Colorado.
yeah, actually, as part of my book, right, and Going Red, I talk about what happened, why Colorado turned blue. They put in term limits. Republicans put in term limits when they were in the majority, and they basically timed themselves out of office. Yeah, they timed themselves out of office.
So
but it was going that way anyway.
Your book again. So where can people get what's the name of your book, Ed, and where can people get your book?
My book is Going Red, and you can pretty much only find it now on Amazon, and you can get the Kindle, you can get the Audible version. I actually read it myself if you buy the Audible version. That's still available on Amazon. But it's not been in bookstores for a while.
Okay.
It's not been in bookstores for a while, but there are still copies floating around. Kindle, Audible, and I think there's still some hard copies available. If you can't find it, just get in contact with me. Actually, when we were doing First Tuesday Conservatives in person, I would bring some books with me, and a number of people were kind enough to buy it. So I hope that they're enjoying it. So Colorado, not a surprise. What was a surprise were the states that Democrats didn't win: North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky. They poured tons of Iowa, for that matter. Joni Ernst.
Right.
They poured tons of money. Texas. They poured tons of money into these things. $300 million across 4 of these different campaigns.
Say that again. $300 million.
$300 million. They gave Allison McGrath $88 million to run against Mitch McConnell. She outraised him by $33 million. He raised 55. She raised 88. She lost by 20 points. How do you spend $88 million running against Mitch McConnell and not even get within 20 points of the guy? I mean, it's Jamie Harrison running against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. They spent, I think it was another $80 million on Jamie Harrison, or in that range. And I think he barely got within double digits of Lindsey Graham. It wasn't close. So those were actually surprises. Those were, seats that Democrats were hoping to pick up. Now they've got these 2 races in Georgia, the runoff races in Georgia, and they're hoping to convert both of them, because if they don't convert both, then Mitch McConnell remains in control of the Senate.
So let's go back to a little bit more about Georgia, and let's talk a little bit about the 2 senators and then why is this happening? First of all, why is Georgia different in what's happening in their state?
Well, Georgia has a requirement that a winning candidate has to have 50% of the vote plus one for statewide races. So if you've got 3 or 4 people running in a race and nobody gets to 50% plus one vote, you have to have a runoff. That's true for the U.S. Senate. It's true for the governor. It's true for this came up 2 years ago because Stacey Abrams ran for governor against Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp clearly won the race. But the question was whether or not he got to 50% plus one, and they were trying to dispute that 50,000 votes were, this is election fraud on the other foot sort of thing. It didn't fly. It wasn't even close. And Stacey Abrams refused to concede. To this day, refuses to concede that election. But Brian Kemp got well over 50% of the vote. So you had 2 Senate races. One was a 3-person race. That was David Perdue's regular election cycle, the incumbent Republican there, running against John Ossoff and a Libertarian candidate. And he beat John Ossoff by about 90,000 votes, but he didn't quite get to 50% plus one because of the Libertarian candidate being in the race. So they have to do a runoff. So it's just the 2 of them on January 5th. The other race, though, was a special election. This was Johnny Isakson's seat. Johnny Isakson had to retire. I don't know if people remember Johnny Isakson. He was ill, and it was clear that he was not doing well. And he was, mentally he was fine. Physically, though, he just wasn't able to do it. So he had to resign his seat. And this was when Brian Kemp was being pressured to appoint Doug Collins to the seat. Yeah, I remember all that.
Yes.
Trump wanted Doug Collins. He ends up appointing Kelly Loeffler. Doug Collins is not happy about that. That's fine. It's his prerogative. And so when they do the special election race, they don't do a primary. So it's an all-in special election. And so there were about 11 or 12 candidates in that race, maybe a little bit more than that. And the person who got the highest number of votes in that race was actually the Democratic nominee for this runoff, Raphael Warnock. He got 31%. Kelly Loeffler ends up with around 25, 26%. Doug Collins got something like 18, 19% of the vote. And to Doug Collins' credit, I mean, he fought that. He wanted to beat Loeffler to get to that nomination. As soon as it was clear on election night that that Loeffler was going to beat him, he turned around, endorsed Loeffler, said, "I'm going to work to get her elected." So kudos to Doug Collins. That's what you're supposed to do. So that was always going to be a runoff. Everybody understood that race was going to have a runoff on January 5th.
Because there's so many people involved in that race.
Yeah. So that's the reason why in Georgia you have to have these runoffs, is because they have that peculiar rule. A few states have this, most states don't. Most states, it's just whoever gets the most votes wins the office. In Georgia, you have to actually cross that 50% line plus a vote.
Kind of like that myself, but oh well.
Yeah, I like it in terms of the special election because I wouldn't want to see Raphael Warnock in the Senate.
True.
But if that's what Georgia voters wanted, of course, then that's what should happen. But I mean, my own personal preference would be, no, let's do a runoff and do a one-on-one and see if that's what Georgia voters really want. I guess it just depends on what each state wants to do. The question now, though, is with all of the accusations, I would say mostly wild accusations about Georgia's voting system going on, is Donald Trump and are some Republicans basically discouraging turnout for the runoff elections? And I think that's going to be a serious problem for Republicans. You got to get people excited.
What's the rationale behind even a thought that way? Why would you discourage Republicans to come out?
Well, I mean, it's irrational. So I'll try to run down the argument for you, but I'm not running this down. I'm not endorsing this in any way, shape, or form by
providing a scenario for us. That's right. What we need, Ed.
So, excuse me, I'm choking on it already, Gary. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay.
The rationale behind this is that the electoral system in Georgia is corrupt. And so therefore, if you're going to vote in the runoff election, you're wasting your time because your vote isn't going to count anyway, because it's all rigged and blah, 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 blah. So why bother turning out? And that's the reason why Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell are down in Georgia telling people they should boycott the election. These are the two lawyers who are doing their own thing in terms of challenging some of the stuff.
It still makes no sense to me, but that's...
It makes zero sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. Even Donald Trump, who's the guy who's amplifying this stuff about Dominion software in Georgia, which is a ridiculous theory, is also saying at the same time, but get out and vote.
Absolutely.
You got to vote. You got to vote for these guys. You can't sit on your hands. You got to vote for these guys. So, it's crazy.
Ed, can you lay out a little bit about the two Democrats that are running against the two Republicans? Give our audiences a little sense of who these candidates are. Sure.
Well, John Ossoff has been around a while. He ran for a House seat in, I want to say it was in Newt Gingrich's old district. It was a special election when, I'm trying to think of the guy, Tom Price, went into the Trump administration. Right off the bat, Tom Price went to Health and Human Services, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Dr. Tom Price. So they had to have a special election for that seat, and John Ossoff ran. They spent something like $30 million on the campaign because it was a special election. There was nothing else going on. So the Democrats raised a ton of money for this. The Republican raised a ton of money for it, and John Ossoff lost by 10 points. I want to say he came back in 2018 to try to run for that seat again, but I don't think that's true. I think it was in fact, I know it wasn't true because it was a different Democrat, and she won. So they actually ended up losing that seat in 2018, one of the seats that they lost. It was a suburban Atlanta seat.
Okay.
That Newt Gingrich used to have. And it had been trending that direction anyway. So it wasn't a huge surprise, but it was certainly a disappointment for Republicans. So then
tell us a little bit about who he is and what does he stand for? Oh, is it Ossoff? Ossoff, is that what it is?
Ossoff, yeah. Jon, John Ossoff, Ossoff. So John Ossoff. He's a typical progressive Democrat who wants to paint himself as a moderate, but he's a Bernie Sanders fan. He's pushing Bernie Sanders' agenda. He's just kind of soft pedaling it for a Georgia audience. It was true in the House race in 2017 as well. This is, he's a typical kind of genteel, progressive, sort of an academic, Mien, if you want to say.
Meander.
Just sort of a typical, academic sort of approach to progressivism, sort of off the campus. Academia, not academic, more like academia.
Paul Wellstone type.
Yeah, kind of like a Paul Wellstone type, although I would say Paul Wellstone had more charisma than John Ossoff did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. More passion, too. Paul Wellstone, never agreed with Paul Wellstone, but, he was a force.
That's right.
God rest his soul. So at any rate, so that's John Ossoff. He's the guy that they're trying to use to make the progressive agenda look palatable to Georgia voters, right?
And he's running against David Perdue.
He's running against David Perdue. So this is not the special election. This is the regular election seat. Bear in mind, whoever wins the special election is going to have to run again in 2 years, because I think that's when that seat is up again for grabs.
Okay, kind of like what we had in Minnesota with Al Franken. Yep.
Exactly.
So talk about that, the candidate then that's running against Kelly Loeffler.
Yeah, that's Raphael Warnock. Raphael Warnock is a longtime preacher. He's been at several different Baptist churches. He was up in New York for a while. He was in Baltimore. He's been in Georgia for a while. I would say if you're looking for some way of putting him into a political frame, he's a bit of a Jeremiah Wright type. Now they're also trying to de-escalate some of this. But there's clips of his sermons that are coming out. He was a big defender of Jeremiah Wright, even after Barack Obama sort of distanced himself from Jeremiah Wright. Warnock has been defending him the whole time. There was actually an interesting write-up by Henry Olson in the Washington Post yesterday about how Ralph, I want to keep saying Ralph Warnock. His name is actually Raphael. And for some reason, I picked it up as Ralph at some point. And I don't know if that's a nickname that he actually uses and embraces, or if I just heard it someplace and it's wrong. So if I say Ralph, I really do mean Raphael, and I don't mean any disrespect for getting his name wrong.
By the way, I just kind of noticed there that you have the Minnesota scenery. Are you right by, I don't think that's the Split Rock Lighthouse right
it
now.
Is.
So, but you're not right in front of that today, though, are you?
Why, of course I am.
Oh,
Gary.
you are?
No, I'm not. No, I got a green screen. There's a picture I took a couple of years ago. There's a picture I took
really
a couple of
plays
years
well.
ago.
It's right over the back of your face that way. And I've got a little Christmas tree right here. It's like the difference of seasons. Mine is live, and he has his beloved green screen there. So
yeah,
anyway.
you know, I spent a little money on the green screen. It attaches to the back of the chair, and let me tell you something. I have a whole series of these things. I got the Star Trek. Enterprise.
You're gonna have to show me some of these things. I might have to do this. By the way, I should let our audience know here. This is Gary Borgendale, and I'm working with Salem Radio here in the Twin Cities, Salem Media, and I'm kind of guest host filling in for our conversation tonight. And Mr. Ed Morrissey from HotAir is the one that's joining us. And he's showing us some of his different backgrounds that he has. This is from his command central that he uses.
This is the bridge of the Enterprise.
Bridge of the Enterprise. That's Bridge of the Enterprise.
And if this is Guardians of the Galaxy, which is probably a little too geeky for everybody else. So I'll go back to. I'll go back to this. This is
to that one. So
yeah.
We were talking about the race in Georgia, and with Kelly Loeffler and Raphael
Warnock. Yeah.
Warnock.
Raphael Warnock. Yep.
Warnock. I've just kind of seen some of the things where they really try to his anti-Semitic potential in there. That's some comments that have come out as well. So it's very winnable. I would think that the Republicans can come out and be successful. There's going to be a lot of money poured into that. Ed, any idea how much money is going to come in to those races in Georgia?
I think I saw a projection today that the Republicans may have already raised something like $300 million for this. Yeah.
Wow.
And Republicans Karl Rove is actually in charge of raising money for the NRSC and their Victory Campaign Fund down there. And you've had a chance to meet and talk with Karl, right?
Yes.
So have I. Karl's one smart dude.
Yes.
He knows how to raise money and he knows how to spend it. So I think you can feel comfortable that wise hands are on the money down there. Democrats are struggling. And don't forget, too, that, John Ossoff outraised David Perdue in this race as well. And still came about 90,000 votes short against David Perdue. So the Republicans have bought up a lot of the advertising inventory already in Georgia. I hope that our brothers and sisters in Georgia really like political ads, because they're going to get nothing but the next 6 weeks, 5 weeks.
Both Ed and I are involved with Salem Media Group on a national scale. That's our national employer. And we do have our stations in Atlanta. And so it's like, here's an extra gift that is coming to hopefully to our radio stations through this extra money that is being spent. I do know from a standpoint that if you have competitive races, there's more money that comes into the coffers of the media, such as Ed and I. And so we do appreciate that from that standpoint.
Yeah, it's great for us.
That's what
almost feel like I got to say, almost feel like we have to disclose this, Gary.
Yes.
It's like, I'm talking about all this advertising money, and it's like, go donate, because it's good for us. It's good for me.
It comes back here. Yes, that's part of how that system works. So before we go, anything else relative to the Senate race in Georgia? Tell us when the races are again for that.
Well, again, it's January 5th. And what I would say is the with Warnock, I think what you're seeing with Warnock, Ossoff, they knew. Ossoff is a pretty well-known candidate. He's been vetted before. He, like I said, he did the House race in 2017. He got national attention on that. So there was a great deal of attention on his background. The fact that he didn't actually live in the district he was running in, which, by the way, is not illegal, but it certainly, politically speaking, is not wise. But Warnock is a different story. Gary, nobody really checked this guy out. I don't think the Democrats checked this guy out. They recruited him to run in this thing. He was one of a number of Democrats, I should say, too. I should point out there was 3 or 4 at least Democrats that were running in this open
in the
open special election, right?
Okay.
There was I think 4 or 5 of them. There were 4 or 5 Republicans besides Loeffler and Collins that were running in there as well. But I suspect what happened was that Republicans did a better job of vetting this guy than Democrats did. And I think what happened in the special election process is they were attacking the other Democrats and probably leaving Warnock to sort of rise to the top of this. And almost the day after the election, I mean, it was almost that soon, all of a sudden the Oppo research starts coming out, and it's going to the Free Beacon, it's going to here, and it's going to there, and it's, these clips of his sermons, and he was part of this, festival for Fidel Castro at his church in New York when he was up there in 1995. And
okay.
I mean, it was almost like, you guys are making it too obvious. You need to stretch this out just a little bit. You have to make it at least look like you've just discovered this.
Sitting in their back pocket, ready to go.
Right. So Jon Ossoff has an advantage, and not necessarily an advantage over David Perdue, but he's got one advantage, which is that Georgia voters kind of know who he is. He's had a chance to define
be in
himself.
The limelight, right?
Well, and and he's got a chance to define himself, right? And because he went through a primary process to run against Perdue. There was some of that stuff that was going on in the primary, and then the general election. They've been at it for 3 months, so they've been trying to define each other, but he's pretty well known now. But Warnock's sort of out of nowhere. So what's been going on for the last 2 or 3 weeks is the Republican Party has really, really, really tried to define this guy as an extreme left guy who is against the military. I mean, he had a sermon where he said you can't be a Christian and be in the military.
Right.
I know you've seen that, Gary.
Yeah.
Issues like that where he claims that the scriptures are a support for socialism, using that favorite old broken down idea about Acts 2.
Right.
Not understanding the difference between
Where they
socialism
sold all their possessions and they gave it away so that they could eat bread together.
Right. Confusing the idea of socialism with monasticism.
Right.
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 And so, I had a little fun writing a rather lengthy analysis of that a couple of weeks ago. They're defining this guy, and the problem for Ossoff is that this is really an all-in thing. You've got 2 Democrats running against 2 Republicans, and you're not going to see a lot of vote splitting on either side. You're not going to see somebody saying, well, I'm going to vote for Perdue, but I won't vote for Loeffler. I'm not going to, I'll vote for Ossoff, but I won't vote for Warnock. You're not going to see a lot of that. So either they both win or they both lose. And Warnock getting defined as this, radical extreme guy is not going to help Jon Ossoff when it comes to runoff day.
Yeah, that's true. Let's step away a little bit. I want to just learn a little bit more and share with our audience more about what Ed Morrissey does at HotAir. And just tell us a little bit more about what you do, Ed,
Sure.
at your role at HotAir. And what is HotAir for some that may not know that?
Sure. Well, HotAir is a great conservative website. It's been around for, we're coming up on 15 years. And I started there 12 and a half years ago, almost 13 years ago. In fact, it'll be 13 years in March. That I started at HotAir. Wow. And I know it's flown by. Salem bought them in February of 2010, but it was launched by Michelle Malkin, and All Upon was one of the original bloggers from the launch. And so I joined later. So, I joined about a year and a half after that. And,
Okay.
but Alapundit's been there all along. Both he and I are senior editors, which we don't really have a managing editor. Our managing editor is the vice president of TownHall Media Group. That's my boss. So we just have senior editors, and it's sort of an autonomous collective, if you will. There's nobody handing out assignments. We just grab the things that we want to grab and write about what we want to write about. And
Do you have a certain area that you concentrate on more, Ed?
yeah, I tend to concentrate on movie reviews and snarky asides about the Kardashians. That's my whole.
That's your whole shtick.
That's it. That's my beat, man. I don't know what to tell you. That's my beat. No, we can all write about whatever we want to write about. There's no assignments, right? But I do tend to get the economic stuff because that interests me. I like numbers. I'm a data guy. So I tend to focus on economy. Alapundit tends to focus on more cultural type of stuff. We both do horse race stuff because that's just the nature. That's the nature of politics. John Sexton is our West Coast guy, so he's coming on later in the day and picking up some of the later breaking stories. He's really good at cultural stuff, so you'll see him picking up on things that I just never seem to think about. Although today, I got to tell you, we had a meltdown in the HotAir family today. And I got to tell you this. It's terrible.
So meltdown in the hot air. So the air went out or something like that?
I'm telling you, this is
propane, the flame went out? Or
it just burst. It just ruptured. Ruptured, Gary. I found out that John Sexton actually likes Love Actually as a Christmas movie. And that's the end.
Oh.
John is done.
My goodness. How can you do that?
My podcast is today, right? So I had Dwayne Patterson on from the Hugh Hewitt Show, the producer from the Hugh Hewitt Show. Yep. We do it every Thursday. And I told John, I said, you got to come on there because we need to beat you up over this Love Actually thing. And he did. He came on for about 20 minutes and we had a great time. John's a great guy. He's got a great sense of humor and he let us beat him up for a while. He beat us up over a couple of things and then he exited. And then of course, Jazz Shaw, who's the weekend editor. Jazz, again, we overlap on a lot of different things. We're all covering kind of the same type of politics. He has been very fascinated by the UFO question because a lot of this stuff is now starting to become declassified. And it's of tremendous interest for our readers. And I think we're all kind of surprised how much interest there is in this. And Jazz has done a great job of being on this. So that's his passion at the moment, but we're all sort of playing in the same thing.
Right. So you write for HotAir. So where can people go to read more about what you've written then, Ed? Is that just HotAir?
Just HotAir.com. Just HotAir.com.
And then you also do podcasts, a live podcast, so people can tune into that just to the same place at HotAir.com for that as well.
Yep, and that's also it's through Facebook, so it's very similar to what we're doing right now.
Okay.
So you can go to HotAir's Facebook page.
And you can kind of tell Ed has done this a little bit better than more than I have. I'm kind of dealing with some light issues, and Ed is just crystal clear on everything.
Okay, but you had 2 minutes to prepare for this?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, 2 minutes prepared for this. I'm not picky. I'm just amazed we're doing this at all. I mean, again, Gary is. I'm going to flip the script on you here because first off, I want people to know honestly what a great guy Gary is. I've known Gary for years and years. He's a terrific guy. Love working with Gary at the local Salem affiliates here in the Twin Cities. So tell us what you do, my friend, at the Salem affiliates here in the Twin Cities. Explain a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you, Ed. That's a great question. I usually don't get asked that because I'm so good at asking other people questions that I don't usually give that up. But I am the local ministry director with AM 980, The Mission, and Salem Radio in the Twin Cities. So I work with all 4 of our radio stations, AM 980, The Mission, 1280 The Patriot, 1570 our new Freedom format, and then 1440 as well. And so my responsibility is to look for programs that we can bring on to our stations I focus from a Christian faith standpoint, but that's really that's a slide over to any other stations. God puts me in a unique position to meet a lot of people in the political and business areas, and sometimes that conversation leads to be more appropriate on the Patriot station or a Freedom station whatsoever. And then it's also advertising, looking for those great advertisers that like our message, that are willing to support us from the Christian and conservative standpoint. And we've also added, most recently, it's called Salem Surround. It's our digital framework, so that now we can use digital tools, targeted email, display advertising, all those different types of things can be so specific out there. And then plus that, as kind of a connection in with the Christian community as well, for the National Day of Prayer, Bible Readathon at the state capitol that we do each year, and just a lot of those activities that go on from that standpoint. God has kind of raised me up as a connector, and so I have the gifting then of connecting a lot of people as the Holy Spirit leads me into connecting with people. This is kind of how I got connected with Scott Nitzel, and it's been great to be working with First Tuesday Conservatives. And then obviously in our employment, that's how our paths cross with Ed very much that way as well. So
Absolutely.
there.
And yeah, oh, that's great. That's great. I just want to make sure people understood, who you are and what you do, because you do a terrific job. And, Gary is everywhere in Minnesota, and it's funny because I didn't realize who Scott was calling. I was, we were looking for somebody to do the thing tonight, and Scott was calling a couple of different people, just because, this is what happens when you're doing live stuff, is that sometimes things don't work out, and you have to be flexible. And this is nothing that unusual. It happens. And Scott's working hard to make sure that you guys get, some really great interviews and stuff like that. And he was working hard to make sure that we could do this one tonight. And he says, well, I got one guy I can call. And and he picks up the phone, and he's talking to the guy, and I can hear on the speakerphone, and I'm thinking, that sounds like Gary Borgendale, but that can't be Gary Borgendale. There's just way too much deja vu for that to be Gary Borgendale. And sure enough, it was my friend Gary.
Yeah, I can be on in a couple minutes. Okay, let's go. Let's make it happen.
He's everywhere, man. Gary's
I filled
everywhere.
in for Lee Michaelson some of the times too, on his show in Crosswalk on AM 980. And, so one of the very interesting ones is I had Booker Hodges on, and he is the Assistant Commissioner of Public Safety under John Harrington. And so he had all the responsibility for guiding the National Guard during the riots on that Friday and Saturday. And listening to him and his perspective of things, whoa, it's quite a bit different. But that's kind of just the connections that the Lord places in front of me, and the stories behind the stories. And Ed, you get a lot of that too, with the stories behind it.
Well, so let me ask you, I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna flip the table here. I'm gonna interview Gary Borgendale for a while.
Come on, Ed, come on.
My issue, I think, is, I focus on national politics. I don't have a lot of focus on Minnesota politics, because obviously I have a national, HotAir is a national readership sort of thing. So except when things that happen in Minnesota have national implications, like abolish the police in Minneapolis, which has been something that HotAir readers are very interested in. I don't get a chance to really dig in and do the nuts and bolts type of politics here that some of the local bloggers here do so well. Mitch Berg does a great job on the Northern Alliance Radio Network. He's my former partner on the air. And him taking that to a more locally focused show is brilliant. And he's just terrific at it. So, let's pick your brain here for just a little bit.
Okay.
One of the issues, people say, well, Donald Trump could win in Minnesota, Jason Lewis could win in Minnesota. And I'm not talking about people in Minnesota, I'm talking about people who are outside. They're telling me this thing, and I say, I'm skeptical. And the reason why I'm skeptical is because Republicans haven't won a statewide election here in 14 years. So when they win one, I'll start predicting the second one. And that's what I would tell them, right? It's like, I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised, but when they win the first one, I'll pick the second one. And unfortunately, that happened this year here too. So let me ask you, what do you see as the gaps here for the Republican Party of Minnesota? What are the issues that lead it to be not competitive in statewide races? I mean, is it just the fact that there's just too many Democrats in this state, which is certainly a possibility? Are there some structural things going on with the Minnesota Republican Party, or just recruiting issues, or what do you see as the gaps here?
Well, I think it really comes down to, we have in the Twin Cities, we have over 1 million internationals, meaning the first and second generation immigrants here into the Twin Cities. And one of the things that you realize that most of them come from very socialist countries or very leader-dominated countries, especially from Africa, where you have no choice and you're told exactly what to do. And when you come to the United States, now that you don't know that you can make different decisions, you're very inclined then to continue on that same pattern. Well, this is what the elders have told us to do, and so we do it. And so that is going to be a major issue of how are Republicans going to wade into that 1 million internationals in the Twin Cities. And that's about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of the population of the Twin Cities. So, and to Republicans' way of life, I guess, is especially if you're in the Senate and the House, you're concerned about your Senate and House district, which is not in the inner core, so that you really have no emphasis going into that. So, I look at it, from a Judeo-Christian standpoint and a follower of Christ, and says, okay, we also recognize that only about 10% of that million are Christians. So if you follow through with our Christian responsibilities of reaching out to the lost, we have 900,000 people that we could share that gospel message with. And the gospel message is one that really provides about self-government. And, I like our libertarian friends a lot, but one of the issues is that if you're not instilling self-government, what are you going to have? And so that's where we see that the church in its finesse in ways should be able to help with increasing that self-government. But without self-government, you're going to have more government, because government's going to make those rules out there. So, it's I believe that the next election will really come down to more of a moral conversation. I've had this conversation with many of my Republicans that look predominantly will say, well, it's about economics and tax policy. And I said, yeah, that's important. But understand, a nation without a moral foundation will not long survive. And that plays out in the state as well. So there's some thoughts anyways to I see what's happening. And this year, I would say the pro-life effort was maybe a little bit better than it has been in the past, but it's still, with Tina Smith being a former executive of Planned Parenthood, it still really never got the impact that I believe it could have done in a stronger campaign. Some of the issues that were going on early just went away. I mean, the whole gun issues just went away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had coronavirus, and here we are. And so, but I guess the future, where the state goes, how does that million internationals in the Twin Cities, how are they directed into the future?
You mentioned the moral dimension to elections, and for all of the positives that Donald Trump did in connecting to what I would call forgotten voters, right? Middle America, flyover country, whatever you want to call it, rural voters, ex-urban voters who felt disconnected and cut out from prosperity. Donald Trump did a great job of connecting with those voters.
Right.
And I think both parties are realizing that now, and both parties are trying to scramble to figure out how to make those contacts. I know Democrats are talking about it specifically. And I think Republicans are going to have that conversation too if Donald Trump completely exits the stage. He's talking about coming back in 2024 for another run, but the flip side of this is that Donald Trump as a moral presence, did you find that to be a hamper in making the connections that you're talking about? Did you find that his either his personality or his personal life, which got tossed out a lot, and perhaps not without reason, did you find that to be an obstacle in making some of those connections? And do you think it's going to be a little easier to do that, to frame these things in a moral sense, if you're moving on from Donald Trump as the leader of the party?
Well, I think, at first I was not a supporter of Donald Trump. I mean, he was not my choice. I think Ted Cruz was probably my choice in there. But one of the things I do remember so clearly about the second debate with Hillary Clinton, and it was the question on who you would appoint to the Supreme Court. And Hillary Clinton was very adamant that she would support those of equality and more dealing and enforcing with Roe versus Wade. And to me, as pro-life and being involved with marriage between a man and a woman, it was game over. It was like, okay, if I had any questions in the past, those have now ended. And so now you go fast forward and you look at what he has done. Yes, were there questions of character? Absolutely. But when you look at what he had done in these 4 years, he was the first president to attend the March for Life. Yep. What he did in Israel relative to moving the embassy to Jerusalem and his stalwart support for Israel, the issues of religious liberty here, as well as around the world, where he was a champion for that. So you saw the results, and you saw how many judges that he has appointed to the federal bench. And you kind of say, okay, may not totally like the guy's style, but man, he's getting the job done.
And I think that that's an easy sell for people who are focused on policy, right? I'm a guy who's focused on policy, and I've had these conversations before with people, and I tell them I voted for Trump twice. I never liked the guy.
Yeah.
But I like the policies, and on policy, he's been really good. And I would have loved to have had another 4 years of not liking the guy, but getting the policies I wanted. Rather than not liking the guy and not getting the policies I wanted, which is what I'm looking at for the next 4 years. That's the reason why I voted for Trump, not because of a character issue, right? I mean, because I just don't. I am not going to get
two character issues. One is what is actually being done relative to moral values. I mean, adultery or cheating on his wife or things of that nature. Yes, that was in his past in there in what he did. And, you didn't hear those type of things. And with the media like they are against him, that would have been all over if it was there. Now his style, that's one of the issues I think we're talking about in the style of how doing it. I think he really should have done is he should have gotten Larry the Cable Guy out there, and whatever it is, get the job done.
Yeah, right. I mean, and I think part of the problem with him this year is he just got too much in his own way. I mean, I think he really just rubs people the wrong way, and those tendencies became aggravated with the COVID-19 issue. So yeah. And again, if you're focused on policy, this is not a big issue for you, right? I was having a conversation, probably the two most moral presidents the three most moral presidents I've known, 3 out of the last 6, that I've experienced, not that I've known him personally, were, Ronald Reagan, very clearly, Ronald Reagan, but then Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama.
Yeah.
I would never want another Jimmy Carter or Barack Obama being president. Not because I think that they're evil, rotten guys. I actually kind of think the opposite. I think they're probably very good men with whom I have profound disagreements on policy, who comport themselves very well, comport themselves with, I think, personal scrupulousness. Political, maybe something different, but personal scrupulousness.
Integrity, what they
Integrity.
do with their family, and one of the strongest things of President Obama was his marriage to Michelle and how they raised the two daughters, and especially in a Black family, that is big time stuff. And that's one of the things really send praise to President Obama for.
Right. I think he handled himself very personally, very well. I think Michelle Obama was a fine first lady, and I get a lot of flack over that too. But I do. I think she took on a traditional first lady role, which I don't think she would have. I don't think that was what she really wanted out of life, but she did. But this is part, I think, of modeling marriage in public life. I think it's pretty clear that that's not who Michelle Obama was, or that what Michelle Obama would have sought. Right. I think she really wanted to be her own person, go out on her own, have a completely different, sort of identity from her husband in terms of, professional, not family, but professional.
Right.
But she sacrificed herself so that her husband could achieve the things that he wanted to achieve. And that's the reason why when people are saying, well, they're going to get Michelle Obama to run, it's like, Michelle Obama's never going to run for office, man. She's done. She is done. She did it for him. It's over. It's done. She'll make comments, she'll do things, but she's never going to run for office. And that's what's admirable about that. I mean, that was admirable.
Right. Well, Ed, I think we're going to have to start toning it down here, because I think our time is soon coming to the end. Again, I've been Gary Borgendale from Salem Media, and it's my opportunity to sit in as this last moment to guest host with Mr. Ed Morrissey.
Such a great job, Gary. It's so good talking with you anyway, and you did such a fantastic job with this. I am so happy that we got a chance to spend an hour or so together, and so happy I was able to do this with the First Tuesday Conservatives, Alpha News MN, great folks right here in Minnesota, and from the Split Rock Lighthouse here.
Say that again real fast, Ed.
Can't say that 5 times fast.
We didn't even get to talk very much about the president's campaign and that part of it. And I still probably have some disagreement with you relative to how this voting has turned out. We may have to do this more of just dissecting more into the voting process and voting integrity, because I believe we've seen some really questions that really strive to keep the Republic in tow. So,
well, I think Scott Ninsel is saying,
"Oh,
yeah,
come on.
Here's the dotted line. Here's where you sign up for that." And man, I would be happy to do that with you anytime, Gary.
Okay, we could probably do that maybe next week with Scott, if we can work that out, because I'm kind of getting the inside information relative from technology people about this Dominion, and it's pretty interesting to dig into this, what's all going on. So with that, we're going to end this tonight. Thank you very much, Scott, from First Tuesday Conservatives, for putting this place, and Ed Morrissey from HotAir. Thank you for joining us tonight as well. And to everyone, good night and a Merry Christmas to all of you.
Good night, everyone.